What is it?
The main thing I got from it was like this sense of feeling seen and validated.
Well, why does it have to be this way?
This book was placed in my hand for this moment.
Insightful, learned a lot, wrote some quotes that I'm ready to like paint on my wall.
I love this book!
That we just kind of pull out some of the big themes that we see and talk about a few different ones.
I apologize if most of my contribution has K-pop references.
Alternative book title, The Feminine Mystique Part 2. You were really just gay all along. Welcome to Book Club.
With Julia!
And Victoria. We're those fangirls that consider it the highlight of the week when they get on first name basis with their local bookstore owner. True story, Ellen is great.
It's a high honor. And we would also like to be your book friends.
This is a podcast for the books we just can't shut up about.
And truly, we cannot shut up about this week's book, 10 Steps to Nanette, a memoir situation by Hannah Gadsby, an Australian comedian, and also one of my favorite humans in the whole world. So be careful how you speak.
There will be spoilers ahead, but it's also like Hannah Gadsby's life.
Yeah.
So not super spoilery, but we will be talking about all aspects of the book.
And it's also all stuff that's connected to their stand-up specials. So if you're familiar with their work at all, this should feel familiar as well.
So whether you've read the book or not, you're totally welcome here.
If you want to support the show, you can rate, review, and subscribe on any and all podcast platforms. We're everywhere. If you look down in the show notes of this or any other episode, and there's a book link, that link will take you to our affiliate page on bookshop.org. If you purchase books from that page, we get a very small kickback that helps us keep the show running. And if you would like to officially join the club, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/bookclubwithjv and sign up for as little as $3 a month. Our favorite series to do is Film Club, where we review book-to-TV or book-to-film adaptations. Our most recent one was Daisy Jones and the Six. We didn't love it. Spoiler alert, but we had a lot of thoughts about how it worked or didn't work. So we have 2 episodes of that available to members only and a bunch of other great content. Also, that's where our archived episodes are. So if you look down at our episode list, you're like, why does this start with episode 51? The first 50 are available to members there as well. We just archived the old stuff. And we are currently saving up for a transcription service so that we can make our episodes more accessible.
Okay, Hannah Gadsby is a self-described, financially insecure, autistic, Australian, genderqueer, vagina-wielding situation. Their words, not mine. You might know Hannah from their stand-up work. Hannah took the comedy world by storm with their special Nanette, which debuted in 2017 on stages and was distributed by Netflix in 2018, and eventually won a Peabody and Emmy Award. Hannah uses they, them pronouns now, but in the book itself refers to themselves with she, her pronouns, so we'll try to be consistent. Okay, so this book, 10 Steps to Nanette, was published in March of 2022, so just over a year ago as of time of recording. And since this is a memoir episode for us, I'm not going to dig too much into Hannah's bio right now. Julie will walk us through a summary of the book, which includes like a summary of Hannah's life story. I do have a few notes, though, of things that aren't covered in the book because they happen post the timeline of this book, but they're definitely worth watching or looking out for if you enjoy following Hannah Gadsby's work. So after Nanette was released, Gadsby's put out 2 other specials that I think they're fantastic, but very different in their own right. So Douglas came out in 2020. That was actually my intro to Hannah Gadsby, besides Julie saying, Hannah Gadsby's amazing. And then finally was like, you should watch this special. I've already watched it 3 times. And she laughed as hard as if she'd never heard the joke before. And it was the most delightful friend experience we had probably of all of 2020.
It was the happiest point in the entire year. Of a dark, dark time.
Yeah. Hannah Gadsby's latest special, Something Special, came out just recently here in 2023 on Netflix. This is something new I learned researching for this episode. So when Hannah signed their deal with Netflix to record Something Special, the deal also included a multi-comic special that Hannah will be producing and hosting. It features all international and genderqueer comedians, and it'll be recorded in the UK in 2023. I don't know if Netflix will release it in this year or if it'll come out next year, but it's being recorded this year. And yeah, it's pretty cool. It's kind of like a project that Hannah is excited about. It couples not only the performance opportunity, but with like mentorship for these up and coming comic acts and providing like professional guidance in a, as Gadsby puts it, a notoriously transphobic industry. I also think the story behind this is kind of interesting. I don't know all the details, but there's a little bit that they share in an interview in Rolling Stone. So for a little context, when Dave Chappelle made some terrible transphobic jokes, Netflix didn't pull his stuff, and the CEO of Netflix, Ted Sarandos, actually name dropped Hannah Gadsby in kind of like a defense when they were like facing backlash.
They were so pissed.
Yeah, and Hannah was like,
God.
No. And very famously outspoken, pushed back on that situation. And then, as Hannah describes it, their people talked to Netflix's people. Hannah's like, I wasn't really involved with all the details of the deal. I don't really know how Netflix works, but that situation kind of allowed Hannah to push for this kind of 2-part deal. So when they signed something special, it also came with this project to platform some really awesome genderqueer comics that haven't yet had opportunities like Hannah Gadsby had.
Yay.
Okay, let's get into the actual bio.
Yeah.
This was like the precursor to the bio, but the summary. What is this memoir about, and what does it tell us about Hannah Gadsby's life?
So, a memoir situation, which is the subtitle, it really is a perfect way to describe this book because it's a memoir in the sense that it tells like the autobiographical life story of the author from childhood to present, mostly in chronological order. But its narrative structure and the purpose behind why the scenes were chosen were all kind of set up to show how Gadsby came to write and perform the special Nanette in 10 steps, as the title suggests. So I'm going to provide the 10 steps and kind of the basics of the content of each one so we can talk about it. Step 1 is epilogue. We'll talk about this more later, but it describes the aftermath of Gadsby's success in the US with all the awkward encounters with celebrities. It's very funny.
Oh my gosh, all the Jennifer Aniston stuff had me giggling. It was really
so funny. Jennifer Aniston doesn't really know who they are, but she was just kind of told, you should talk to Hannah Gadsby. And then Hannah Gadsby's like, why are you saying this? And Jennifer Aniston's like, I don't know. Incredible. So that's sort of grounds us in present day, what we're probably most familiar with. So step 2 is foundation mythology. It covers Gadsby's early childhood, growing up in a small industrial town in Tasmania, which is an island off the coast of Australia, as the youngest of 5 siblings, with a very blunt and strong-willed mother and a calm and slightly out-of-it father. Very peculiar family. Step 3, the formative years, intercuts between very heated anti-gay scare tactic campaigns and arguments that were happening in Tasmania and Australia as a whole as Gadsby was going through adolescence and discovering they were gay and having these kind of unnameable autism-related difficulties at school, being a victim of sexual discrimination and assault in different situations, and having a difficult time coping with change. There's so much happening in their life at this time. Barely surviving being a teenager, trying to figure out how to get employed, and then finally getting into art school to pursue an art history degree on the mainland. So it's sort of this very large section about the halfway point that ends with Hannah Gadsby leaving to go to the mainland. And it's all sort of intercutting at the same time with some very horrible homophobic rhetoric in kind of public discourse. And those two stories develop kind of side by side. Step 4, the wilderness years, is very short because it deals with the aftermaths of some extremely traumatic and difficult years that Gadsby sort of pulls the curtain on and sort of refuses to mine for entertainment. And so we sort of land 7 years after we left off with them getting into stand-up comedy, almost by accident, and realizing they're very good at it. And also that they seem to have gotten some comedy instincts from their mom, who just has some iconic heckling behavior that would be mortifying, but also truly incredible.
I love their mom's response to I'm going to try stand-up comedy. Wasn't it something like, but I'm funnier than you? Yes! It was like, and I'm not a stand-up comic, so what are you even trying? That's so funny.
Step 5, the bell curve jar, covers Hannah Gadsby now finally has a career, right? So the bell curve jar is the trajectory of that career, and as, their life has this rising stability, it's also accompanied by increased executive dysfunction and several phases of burnout and difficulties with relationships. And so the arc of this chapter is really all of the discoveries that lead to both an ADHD and an autism diagnosis. Once Gadsby was out of survival mode and getting some more stable income, suddenly all these other issues become more apparent. So then step 6, Whirl Interrupted, is sort of a pause to articulate how autism presents in Gadsby's life and kind of how they were figuring out how to work with it at the time. And then step 7, All Part of the Soup, mirrors the formative years in a way because it pairs another nationwide televised debate on LGBTQ rights leading up to the legalization of marriage equality. And so that's all the kind of context and ideas and all the parts of the soup, basically, that were swirling around to create the context that led Gadsby to want to write Nanette. And so even though they didn't know at the time that they were about to write Nanette, we can sort of see all the foreshadowing as people who have seen Nanette of all the pieces that are building blocks to get to the point where they start writing. So in the step 8, Gathering Strands, is a short chapter that shows the inception of the show Nanette as a kind of kernel of an idea. And then step 9, Women's Work, covers the writing and workshopping process for Nanette, which is really fascinating. And then step 10 is the conclusion and the performance of Nanette itself, and ends with Gadsby's mother seeing and reacting to Nanette. And then the prologue at the end is the complete transcript of a short story that Gadsby wrote when they were a child, and wow, is it a story. It's something.
It's something. Yeah, so if you caught that, the epilogue is usually at the end of a book, but it was at the beginning, and the prologue that's usually at the beginning of the book is at the end, so it's kind of like a little switch of the form there, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. Okay, so Julia, you were the one that picked up this book first.
Mm-hmm.
I remember you sent me a photo. You were at a bookstore, and you were like, I'm getting this, we need to read it. So what was your experience reading Hannah Gadsby's memoir situation?
For some reason, I don't know why that's so funny to me. I know, because sometimes I don't think about how messages I send are perceived.
In the most genuine friend moment of like, I'm excited by how excited you are. We will definitely read this. Also, it's like a weird intersection too, not only of our experiences and interests, but like I tend to be the one that gravitates more towards celebrity memoir. And so when you have a celebrity that has a memoir that you're actually interested in reading, I get really excited because I've got probably like 10 on the back burner that I'm like, you won't want to read this. I gave Brandi Carlisle's memoir like 2 stars out of 5 on Goodreads or on Storygraph. And I still kind of want to talk about it. But I'm like, I'm not going to put you through it because I wasn't a book I won't shut up about. It's just a book I'm like casually interested in chatting about.
Right. Yeah. You can narrate it for me, like shot for shot, as if it's a movie, and then we can talk about it.
That's some interesting member-only content, is me describing a book shot for shot. And then we're like, this movie took a weird turn. I'm like, I know. It just starts doing this, I guess.
Anyway, so my experience, I watched Nanette. I want to say it was winter. It felt dark and cold. I remember being swaddled in a blanket. It was our first apartment. I know that for sure. No one else was home. But I watched it because my art history friend recommended it. Apparently all the art history geeks were really excited about it. I do remember crying quite a bit, but I didn't remember a ton of the show. What mainly stuck with me over the years were all the art history things. So hatred of Pablo Picasso, and especially the Van Gogh stuff.
I forgot to put this in my author bio, but Hannah Gadsby just helped produce an art exhibit about Pablo Picasso in Brooklyn that's now available. Pablo-matic, Picasso According to Hannah Gadsby. June 2nd to September 24th at Brooklyn Museum. Go check it out. Wasn't planning to go to New York, but I'm like, maybe I need to now. Okay.
Yeah. The Van Gogh stuff in Nanette is truly incredible. And like the very, very last line about like the sunflowers existing because Van Gogh had a brother who loved him makes me weep every time. Like, oh my God. So that's mainly what stuck with me. And then I didn't really think about Hannah Gadsby at all until my autistic friend then in 2020 was like, have you watched the new Hannah Gadsby special? And I was like, I haven't thought about Hannah Gadsby in like 2 years. So no, I haven't. And they were like, it's called Douglas. You have to see it. And when I tell you, I have never laughed so hard in my life, like before or since. This is like falling off my couch, throwing, like I was laughing so hard I didn't know what to do with my body. It was just like throwing myself around. My face hurt. I might have been dying. Like I'd never been so happy. Like it was just perfectly encapsulates like my little corner of the autism spectrum. And like because every presentation is different, like it's never gonna like perfectly match me. But Hannah Gadsby got so darn close that like I love everything. I then proceeded to watch it about 5 more times that week, including once with all the roommates, and I don't know which number of watch that was. I think it was maybe number 3.
I think it was, yeah.
Honestly, I think that show may have helped me get through the pandemic, or at least was a contributing factor. So, after Douglas, I was like, this is my new favorite person. I'm going to follow Hannah Gadsby on Instagram, which is delightful. And so I heard about the book as soon as they started like promoting it. But me being the cheapskate that I am, I waited until it came out on paperback this year to buy it. When I was in New York this spring. And it was not necessarily an emotionally easy read. Like, Hannah Gadsby's had a hard life. And it's hard in ways that are particularly poignant to me personally, but just sort of amplified by a lot. Especially like the teen years section, because like, wow, the trauma. Just piles upon piles. So it's not like, you know, yes, there are jokes and they're incredibly well-crafted jokes, but you don't go into this book thinking it's going to be super funny, because that's not the point of it. There are jokes, but it's not about the jokes. But I really, really loved it. And I came to the end feeling like I had been understood and changed as a person, and mainly just this like profound sense of awe about Gadsby's craft as a writer. I feel like that's kind of the lingering impression for me, is just like, wow, they are so good at this on so many levels as a storyteller, and like the way that they think, and like just really, really impressive. So we're going to spend a good amount of time talking about this as a text, as well as some of the themes. Yeah, what about you?
After we watched Douglas together in 2020, Hannah Gadsby was like on my radar. And so like when their latest special came out, I think I watched it like, if not the day it came out, like that week. But I realized when we were like making this episode and like planning for it, that I kind of avoided Nanette by happenstance until reading this book. There's a few reasons I think I stayed away from Nanette, but I was aware of it. I knew it was important. I would probably even recommend it to people who would like describe things they liked if I thought it was similar to the description I knew of Nanette. But I didn't watch it until after reading this book. When it was released in 2018, so when you watched it, I was going through a somewhat difficult period in my life where I was questioning and wrestling with what it meant for me to be queer. And I, in quotes, dealt with my like difficult time I was going through by just avoiding queer content for a long time, and avoiding conversations with loved ones, and just avoiding everything. So when I was finally in a space where I think I would have been like really appreciative of Nanette, I knew enough that it was like a heavy, deep work about trauma, and it's not supposed to be super funny. And when I was like, oh yeah, I'm aware of it, it never felt like a time when I would sit down to watch a comedy special and I'd be like, I'm not going to watch Nanette. That's too serious. Like, oh, I don't have time for that right now, or I don't have the emotional capacity for that. And then when we watched Douglas, it was 2020. And of course, I'm not going to want to follow that up in a very traumatic time of life in the world with watching Nanette. I just was like, it's going to be heavy. I don't want to watch that right now. So actually reading the entire memoir without watching the special was kind of fun, because I got kind of like the director's commentary, like a peek behind the curtain before I even saw it. So when I did watch it, I could be aware of what was happening, and I could recognize my emotional response and see what Hannah Gadsby was doing, infuse at just the right moment a little bit of levity as like a life ring for audience members.
Yeah, we both I rewatched it. And the same night you watched it, like on accident.
Yeah, I didn't realize you were watching it too.
Yeah, like a week ago. Because it had been so long. And so I wanted to reacquaint myself with it. And yeah, watching Nanette after reading this book really gives you this kind of, oh my god, light bulb moment. Because you realize that like everything's connected. You can kind of see the shape of it. And exactly what you're describing, like the exact mechanics of what each joke and theme is doing, and you're just like, oh my god. Because the first time I was just along for the ride, you know? I had no idea. I was told it's not super funny, it's kind of sad, but it's really good, you should just watch it. That was like the information I was working with. And that art history. She's like, there's some great stuff about Van Gogh. And I was like, what on earth is this show about? So I really was along for the ride. But watching it, knowing how the craft works, like, whoo, baby. Really, yeah, you really appreciate it.
So for today's discussion, we want to talk about why we can't shut up about this book. Yeah. And in summary, Hannah Gadsby is a wizard, specifically a magician of content and form. And so Hannah took the celebrity memoir genre and really bent it in their will to do something that was both incredibly controlled, but also incredibly vulnerable. And it results in this like very relatable, but also empowering and empowered reading experience. So we'll dig into what that all means. But yeah, let's talk about form first. What is happening with this book?
So something I feel like summarizes and a repeated motif throughout this book that Hannah Gadsby uses and that kind of summarizes a bit of how the story goes is they always say there is never just a straight line to be found through a life punctuated by trauma. And so this memoir is a very unique experience because it's serving multiple functions, and it's also winding around traumatic experiences in a way that, like, Gadsby continues to reference this hypothetical ghostwriter of like, if a ghostwriter were writing this book, this is what they would do with this traumatic thing that happened in my life. They would treat this as some kind of inciting incident or recurring theme. They would use this as a plot point that seemed central to how future things in the story developed, and they would use it. And I refuse to. I don't want to use it for your entertainment. There's so many moments like that where Gadsby references directly on a meta level what they're doing with this book. They're addressing the memoir genre as a whole, but playing with it. And so the subtitle of A Memoir Situation is kind of perfect because it's like, it is a memoir, but it's a memoir situation. It's like something... It's like
adjacent, but different, but the same. Yeah.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought this now until you literally read the quote, and then I'm looking at these next notes. By making it not just a straight line narrative, Gadsby also literally does this by creating almost like a loop in the way that the story is told. Like we said, the epilogue is first, so what would usually be at the end of the book is at the beginning, and the prologue is last. And it kind of creates this moment of like full circleness, if that makes sense, because you start in the epilogue and it's kind of like a, you might be wondering how we got here kind of moment. It backs up to their childhood and goes all the way around again to the filming of the Nanette special, and then brings us into the prologue, which is Gadsby's first book they ever wrote as a child. I think what also makes it so masterful is it's not just like, oh, I'm going to play around with style, but the content fits the form and the form fits the content in a way where like the structure of the book mimics the themes that we're about to experience. So like this idea, this theme that there's never a straight line to be found through a life punctuated by trauma is actually how the book operates as well. It doesn't operate in a straight line. And it actually, like you said, it weaves around a lot of the traumatic moments, which I think pushes back against the extreme ends of the memoir genre, especially when it comes to celebrity memoirs, right?
Which you've read a lot of.
I've read many a celebrity memoir. Like on the extreme ends, we get the glorifying of the self, I created a straight line narrative of how I got to where I'm at. These can still be really good books, but they purposefully leave out a lot of moments where the hero, the main character, looks bad. Or if we get moments of when they look bad, it's resolved. And I understand too, like this is also maybe a healthy and positive way for people to write about their lives from a place of, I have worked through this and now I'm able to write about it. Because on the other end, we have what might be characterized as like trauma porn. Like I'm just going to in detail talk about this traumatic experience that either I inflicted on someone else or was more times often than not someone writing about the trauma inflicted on them in a way that like just kind of wallows in it. Then it creates buzz around the book because everyone's staring at it like a train wreck. Like I can't not read more of this. I'm just going to keep feeding on this trauma porn and either feel better about myself because my life isn't that bad or have a trauma bond with the author. And not only does Hannah Gadsby not do this in their book, they make a point to say, I'm not doing either of these things. Even when one of my favorite kind of self-reflective moments is when Hannah Gadsby's writing about their workshopping of Nanette and that they took, was it MDMA?
Yeah.
And locked themselves in their house to work on it and was just I'm going to take drugs and figure this out. And they were at this point, I should tell you, don't try this at home. But that's literally what I did.
Yeah.
I'm going to be honest. This is what I did. I'm not saying you should do it, but I'm also saying I'm not in a position to tell you what to do and what not to do anyways. So moving on. And it's kind of that is a thing that happened. Take it or leave it. And we're going to move on. And so it doesn't shy away from it. It doesn't glorify it. And it doesn't say oh, I was so messed up, I had to do that. No, they own their experience.
I honestly found that part, I was this is actually a really clever shortcut too. Because what they were doing, it wasn't to write. It was to connect on a sensory level through the journey of material in order to process it in a very sped up fashion under the influence of drugs to kind of desensitize themselves to some of the harder things they had to say so they wouldn't be re-traumatized, but also to find sensory connections. So they were stimming their way through the set and throwing little things in to give themselves reprieves. Most fascinating process I've ever seen. And I was I think they might be on to something. I'm not saying that everyone needs to take psychedelic drugs, but I'm it worked. It really worked. I found that so fascinating. But I agree that there wasn't a ton of details about the experience of the drugs. It was more the function of this is what I did, take it or leave it. I'm not going to give you all this sort of glorified details or these really horrible details. I'm just going to tell you what I used it for, and then we're going to move on.
In a similar way, they don't dwell on their brief, I don't know if they would characterize this addiction, but their brief stint of using cocaine. It's relevant to some of the story that they're I'm going to tell you that this happened, but also I'm going to tell you in summary and brush over because this was a really it was also coupled with a really terrible time in my life and also helped me realize these other things about myself. But I can't not tell the story without telling about this part. And so I thought that was very, again, wizardry, very masterful writing and storytelling to leave in relevant truths in whole and complete ways with nuance, purposefully deciding when to give more or less detail. And again, I think this leads into this theme of empowerment. As the author, they're empowered to make these decisions and not feel like they have to be a tell-all kind of book, but also empowering. I felt empowered as a reader to think about what are stories I tell about my own life, which is something we love to talk about here on the podcast, is the stories we tell ourselves. Where can I have more grace with myself in the stories I tell myself? Where can I have more honesty, more vulnerability, and still feel like I can, retain that control? And we talk about a lot on the podcast, is this a story we want to share publicly, or is this something we just want to talk about as friends? And then we'll figure out which pieces we want to share and being able to hold that balance of connection, because that's so powerful and exciting and builds community, but also where do we hold back and keep things for ourselves or for our own friendships. And one of my favorite bits is when Hannah writes, I'll keep the best secrets to myself because I'm not done quitting comedy just yet. And it kind of leaves that little tease of maybe someday I'm going to want to tell these stories. And at that point, you'll get to hear it. But for now, I'm keeping some of it to myself.
And it's such a, again, metatextual thematic connection to the special Nanette, right? So this book is telling the story of how we got to the stand-up special Nanette, but in practice, in the creating of this book, it's completely in line with, in a kind of, again, circular way, because most people experience Nanette before they read this book, is again, a very strong through line through Nanette is the way that they had to cut off parts of their story and their trauma in order to turn it into a joke, because a joke needs a setup punchline, and it doesn't let you resolve stories. There's not a beginning, middle, and end, and they weren't willing to put their life on as a punchline anymore. And so, yeah, the making of the memoir mirrors that. And in a way, it is providing that beginning, middle, and end. It's as a follow-up to Nanette, it's sort of saying, okay, I told you that I was going to I need to tell my story properly. I need to tell my story properly. And this is them telling their story properly. You know, obviously it doesn't end in the sense, like, they're still alive and their story continues on. But the story of Nanette and all the things that went into it, this is giving it that beginning, middle, and end. Even then, there are further questions in the book of, like, does a story of your life, even a written text of your life, because it's a created thing, does that even provide enough to properly represent your own experience? Because they have this quote about their difficulty of talking about how they got started in comedy, because it was kind of on accident and it was coming out of a very, very traumatic period of life. And so they say, a start is not the same as a beginning. The world can witness a start and so it becomes history, but all stories begin out of sight, with threads only you can choose to pick up and retrace for the telling. But when it comes to this story, I've never really known where to begin. I felt like that kind of worked on multiple levels, because it feels like, I mean, the book doesn't even begin where it begins, right? It begins at the end and then starts, and there is a section, right, called Gathering Threads, the beginnings of things that would become Nanette. So, like, there's multiple layers of questioning of form. And, like, are you ever to fully tell your story properly? Can you ever truly represent yourself in a way that will help people understand? Yeah, I feel like this book is kind of, it works on so many levels. It's
Yeah, when we were first talking about this book, you mentioned that it's sort of like an ars poetica, which is a fancy term for, like, a piece of art that explores what went into creating a piece of art. So, for example, a poem written about the experience of writing a poem, kind of where we get the idea of ars poetica. And in many ways, this book is an exploration about how to tell a story and how the special was made. But then the special is also like all the things in the book are in the special, and all the special stuff are in the book. Like, it's a book about the craft without it being like a teaching. You know, it's more like an exploration of the craft, not like a how to do a special in 10 steps. I liked this way that they summarize the writing process. They write, there is a part of me that wants to leave this alone and let you believe that what I did was magic. But there is a bigger part of me that wants the world to know what I did, because I don't think many of the people with strong opinions about Nanette have managed to scratch very far below her surface. So if you don't mind, I will manufacture some artificial lines through my process just to give you an appreciation for the metaphorical iceberg that is Nanette. But to be sure, none of this was linear.
That section on, I think it's women's work, that section, on the writing and workshopping and crafting of Nanette is so fascinating. It really felt like, I mean, we'll get into this in a minute, but it really felt like a kind of peek into my own writing process that I find such a hard time. It's so hard to articulate to people. Something I'm still kind of learning about myself. It really felt like, I mean, yes, this book is writing that's about writing, right? It's a story about a story that's about stories. It's like, works on so many layers and feels so neurodivergent to me. Like, it feels like someone who has fully leaned into understanding the particularities of how their brain works and just fully leaning into it. There's a self-awareness to it that's constantly calling out the text itself and the genre itself, but also the author themselves. The way they describe their own thinking is, I am never not cross-referencing the trees with the forests, which I just thought was so perfect as like a way to describe the web-like complexity of so much neurodivergent thinking. You make connections and your thought process works in a way that's very different and can be very, very meta. And so, like, you see this a lot with their specials, where, like, with Douglas, they start the beginning of the special like, okay, here's an outline of everything I'm going to tell you in this special. And I've made this outline. It's so important to me that I've actually cut down the official show, and it's constantly cross-referencing these bigger ideas. And so like this is a person in their full power as a writer with full control over their story, telling it exactly the way they want it to be told.
Yeah, so this kind of takes us into the second part of our discussion about the content itself and how Hannah Gadsby's vulnerability leads to some really great relatability and feeling seen by a lot of readers. And when I say a lot of readers, I mean by Julia and I.
Yeah!
I can't speak for other readers. I haven't talked to all of them. Hannah Gadsby describes their special. Nanette is basically Eat, Pray, Love for autistic queer folk. And I love that quote. Recently, I had referenced Eat, Pray, Love to someone, and they were like, I don't know what that is. And I was like, wait, what? So if you don't know what Eat, Pray, Love is, it's a memoir about a woman trying to heal herself from like severe emotional, spiritual crises. But it's also known because the writer is like this privileged white woman who has a lot of money and can travel the world for a year, goes to Italy, India, and Indonesia. So it's kind of become a bit of a meme for the reference point of someone who like goes off to quote unquote find themselves. And so, yeah, Nanette is basically that like, oh my gosh, let me like live through this experience as a means to like bond and find myself because it's relatable in many ways.
So one major theme running throughout the book, I feel like gets kind of introduced first as its own subject, but also as the beginnings of Gadsby's journey with gender, queerness, and neurodivergence, which are all kind of interwoven. They're all related. And the theme is their relationship to their body and their profound discomfort with it. And the way they describe it is so incredibly iconic. So I will try not to laugh as I read this. Okay. Hey, right. I had absolutely no idea how uneasy in my own skin I'd always felt. As if I don't quite fit myself properly, as if my flesh is a pair of underpants that is forever sliding up the butt crack of my soul.
Oh, that one's good. I just love the imagery of the butt crack of the soul.
The butt crack of my soul. Oh my god. Like, it's such a, like, profound moment. But it's such a visceral metaphor as well, because you know exactly what that feels like when, like, you have an accidental wedgie and you can't fix it, and it's just like, truly incredible. Yeah, so their relationship with their body was a theme of a lot of their earlier stand-up specials, and it's something that they've kind of, that they talk about in the book, they've sort of stopped using as material. And I think this book takes a very compassionate lens on, you know, the way that their relationship with their body evolved due to these kind of traumas and outside factors, and also autism in particular made them very unaware of the kind of difference between the inside experience and the outside experience. And it isn't really until they start doing stand-up that they realize how different those two things are. So they say, it was the first time in my life that I grasped that other people did not witness me the same way that I experienced myself. And it truly frightened me. And I really related that very strongly personally. Anytime this subject comes up of like the difference between how my kind of internal experience of myself versus like how I'm perceived, I just think of very early days. We're sitting in Victoria's Indiana apartment. This is pre-Chicago move, so this is summer 2017, and we're taking the Enneagram quiz, and every single question, I'm like, Victoria, is this true about me? Victoria, is this true about me? I spent like 2 hours on this quiz, and Victoria was not having it. She was so angry.
I was like, just answer the questions. I don't know. I'm like, what do you think about yourself? This is about what I think about you. It is, a lot of our early friendship core memories are a lot more interesting looking back with what we know about ourselves now.
Oh, they're so much funnier in hindsight. Because we're just like, wow, we did not understand what was going on in our little brains. Because some of the questions in personality quizzes are about how other people experience you. And I have no idea. I have no idea. I've picked up context clues over time, or like if people tell me directly, I can file that away. But it's really distressing because there's this sense that people are perceiving you in a way that's different than what you're experiencing, but you don't know what that is in the moment. Often it's later that they tell you how it went, And so you have to learn to draw manual connections between internal experiences and context and be like, okay, it's possible that this is like the other time where people experienced me in this way, and so I need to make sure I do this, this, and this. And it's very hard. And when I was younger, I didn't realize that people perceived me if I was not choosing to be perceived. I just thought I was invisible unless I was actively engaging with someone. And it was always so startling when people like noticed me or told me later that I like did or said something that had a profound impact on them. And I was like, what? Like you knew that I existed? Always very, very shocking. I feel like this book, because it's being told in hindsight with the autism diagnosis and the queer identities firmly in place, we're then taking that interpretive lens all the way through. We start to see kind of their early experiences of their body through that lens, including their relationship to gender. There's a ton of examples, but they just don't really like vibe with gender. You just don't find it very interesting. But as a child, it was more about realizing that they weren't very good at being a gender. So they describe like, whenever I felt as if I had any knowledge, I was inclined to share it. Whereas natural women rarely seem to want to do the knowing of things out loud, right? So there's constant, like, my instincts do not match the kind of societal gender standards. And it seems like everyone else seems to already know how to do this, and I don't.
So yeah, this kind of leads into one of the other like primary themes of the content, which is Hannah Gadsby's queerness. And the first part of this book, as Julia described in the summary, intersperses Hannah's personal experiences of their childhood with the social and historical context that they were raised in, which was conservative Tasmania, where homosexuality was illegal, and there was a large political debate happening about whether or not gay people could exist safely in Tasmania and Australia as a whole. And I think it was really important to include, not only for Hannah's own story, but also as Hannah's work has now had this broad international appeal, and they come from a place where I literally know nothing about Tasmania. And so I thought it was really great to get that really well-written and concise history alongside the personal experience, which is honestly one of my favorite ways to learn about history is like, tell me the facts, tell me what was happening in the media, tell me what was happening with the politics, and now tell me a story about an individual's life and how what was going on in the greater world was impacting that person's life, which is one reason I really enjoy historical fiction. Another piece we haven't really talked about was Hannah's family wasn't religious, but they were in a very conservative religious community. And so I think it was also important to highlight that even though Hannah's mom was proud that her children were not raised with religion, it did not keep Hannah safe from the pervasive and dangerous homophobic rhetoric and behavior in their community. I think Hannah does a really good job, like, eloquently expressing the way that so much of this can be internalized and lead to years and decades of shame connected to their discussion of body. That shame is not something that is easily shaken from their bodily experience. And it was many years later, after 10 years, of a comedy career, to really start unpacking what is a big theme in Nanette of like, I'm done being the butt of my jokes. Like, I'm done with self-deprecating humor. Like, there's enough discourse out there putting down and making fun of people like me. I'm done doing that too. Yeah. One of the parts of Nanette, man, talk about an emotional experience. You go from laughing to literally tears coming down my face when they talk about what happens when, quote, you soak a child in shame in the Nanette special. Ugh. So in this book, we also get kind of like the backstory on the backstory of Nanette when it comes to Hannah's relationship with their mom. And one of the quotes that really, I think it's in the special and in the book.
Yeah.
One of the examples of Hannah talking about how they've previously used their life as kind of like set up punchline and cutting the story off is that they've talked a lot about their coming out experience with their mom and what their mom said in response, but not until Nanette did they take the space to tell the further story, which isn't funny, it's just true, which is how they've had the chance to build such a great relationship to this day. And their mom telling them, quote, I guess I wanted you to change because I knew the world wouldn't. I should have been your friend, but I wasn't. And I'll never forgive myself for that. And yeah, to have that kind of like full circle, like giving us a moment of the humor and what was funny, but also painful, and like making light of hard times to help you get through it, but also realizing that you can't just end there. And giving the resolution of part of a small glimpse of the resolution of their relationship, I thought was really key, not only to the book, but to the special and what kind of makes it work.
Yeah, I really loved getting the backstory to that scene in particular, because that line is so poignant and it comes into the special kind of without context. They even make a joke about how it's kind of random in the special, but then we get the whole context of that scene. It feels like such a powerful demonstration of exactly what Gadsby's talking about. Of, like, when you give a story a beginning, middle, and end, it has this whole new thing. It's not just a joke anymore. It's not... A joke is sort of artificially constructed context that needs to be shrunk down in order to make everyone in the room laugh. But, like, a story is, like, dripping in context. And it makes you realize how every single, particularly with the queerness narratives that we get all throughout Hannah's sort of growing up experience, you realize how every single choice and every single bit about their relationship with their mom and the political discourse that was happening, and every single choice in this memoir leads us to a particular scene or a particular choice about what went into Nanette that gives, like, 1 minute or 20 seconds of the special the whole context that it needs in order to be fully understood. As a sort of strategy for choosing what gets included is just, like, so cool and so profound. Yeah. And something that's interesting is that they talk about in the book is the choice not to include the autism diagnosis in Nanette.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. And I think not knowing, because I hadn't watched Nanette, I assumed it included discussion of neurodivergence because I had seen later specials. And I thought it was interesting, and it gave me a moment to think, too, about kind of circling back to the conversation on what you choose to share and what you don't choose to share, and, like, how we create stories and tell stories about our lives. I really appreciated the moment that they describe of realizing there's way too much content to fit into 1 hour and deciding, okay, I'm removing the stuff about body, I'm removing the stuff about autism. And that kind of, like, pulled the whole thing together and made it more focused, which I think is interesting, too, to think about, like, when we are trying to not only share a story, but share a specific message. Like, there's something that Hannah Gadsby is trying to do with this special, not just tell all the things about their life, and realizing when, this is too big of a topic, it's going to be there because I'm there. Like you said, you recognize the neurodivergent aspects of the special without them ever having to say it because they exist and they're there. But taking that part out to kind of tighten up the story. So it was cool to see how the book allowed so much more discussion of autism that Nanette doesn't.
Autism is a crucial part of the story leading up to Nanette because it's so integral to their experience of their body, their experience of gender, their experience of sexuality, their experience of being in their family. Like, it's the filter through which they process the world. And those diagnoses of ADHD and autism both really helped with their healing process as well, which Nanette was part of. So, like, it is really crucial, and it is there in the whole special, but it's just not spoken about directly. So I really liked the way that they tackled it in the book. I found the description of, like, the sensory experiences and their thought processes and the visual depiction of burnout. There's, like, this very particular vignette where their burnout is really, really bad, and their apartment's a disaster, and they're, like, eating off of the microwave tray, like, eating spaghetti off of the tray itself in the microwave, and they have to get on a plane in, like, 20 hours, and they can't find any of their socks, and so they spend, like, 5 or 6 of those hours combing through their apartment, laying out all their socks so that they can pair them up. And then they end up just, like, literally throwing away their dishes before they leave to get on this plane. And it was so well done. Like, every single choice about how to visualize or how to, like the wedgie metaphor, how feeling uncomfortable in your body, all this kind of stuff. So well done. I really liked this metaphor about trying to learn how to join a conversation as a teenager. I said, I felt like I was trying to join a jump rope routine in cement boots. Like, just wonderful, right? And there's a lot of moments post-diagnosis, or not even necessarily post-diagnosis, but moments that you sort of see as like autistic joy, you know? So there's in high school landing on their special interest of art history, and they write this essay. It like consumes their whole life and they fail all their other classes, but they write this paper that's just a compilation of facts about art history. And the teacher's like, this isn't an argument, this isn't a paper, this is just a collection of facts. And Gadsby's like, but I had never been more excited by anything than I had been about compiling that list of facts. And I was like, isn't that me? Isn't that like all of my conversations with Victoria? I'm like, look at the list of facts. This is so exciting. And then she brings me facts, and that's fun.
This is why we're friends.
And there's a moment after their diagnosis where they're learning to reevaluate some of the positive experiences of being so sensitive. And they go swimming with like their brother and like some whale sharks in like the ocean. And they just realize like how much beauty they can experience in the world by being so sensitive. And like it's a really kind of nuanced whole person picture. And then there are some truly exceptional rants about institutionalized ableism and the kind of gross harsh capitalistic individualism of, I didn't know how to describe this, but like former colonies of like Britain or like Northern European countries. I don't know what the best way to describe it is. Anyway, so these two quotes are great. First one, it is absolute bullshit that the only way I could access the help I needed was by accidentally activating some kind of exceptional potential I didn't even know I had until I was nearly 30 years old. Right? So they like spent 7 years truly struggling and barely surviving. And by accidentally discovering that they were really good at something that was specifically in show business, where show business, there's this whole infrastructure around keeping their artists, catering to their every need, you know?
Yeah. Having like those, what do they call it? They're writers, you know, like when a comedian or a musician or performer like shows up at a venue and the venue has a list of all the things that person needs.
Yes.
Like that is incredible. Like you just show up and be like, I mean, there's like the jokes that people put crazy things in their writers, like only green M&Ms, which I've heard is also just a way for people to know that the venue read their writer.
Oh.
As they put like a weird obscure thing in there to see like, do they actually pay attention? But yeah, someone to take care, to make sure they have food, someone who's there to make sure they literally have handlers to walk them around so they know where they're going and when they need to be places so they can like just focus on the thing they're good at.
Which is literally what all autistic people need. Or we need some kind of communal structure, right? So it's not like we need a whole team of people, basically. We can't do all that kind of executive function work on our own. And then also this rant about, so that first one was basically a reflection on their privilege and how frustrating it was that like they couldn't figure any of this stuff out about themselves until it's a total accident that they found like this thing. And then this rant is about messed up bureaucracies. So welfare systems don't accommodate for transients because welfare systems are not built to be accessible. They are built to be temples of administrative doom because apparently welfare is a treasure that must be protected. Everyone in the US say amen. And then they're like, can somebody please do something about that? I am not good enough at organizing to be an actual activist, but searching for the connections between the big picture and the little picture is a very ASD thing to do. So it's like, I see that this is a problem and I don't have the resources or tools to do something about it, but this is messed up.
I really appreciate reading this memoir. It gives me another tool to needle you into reading another celebrity memoir again. If I can be like, remember when we read the Hannah Gadsby memoir and it was a really good time? Like, what if we also read this one? So I'll save that, put that in my pocket for a rainy day when I need to convince you. Just kidding. Usually you're the one that you're like, you know that genre you really like? Here, I'll read it with you. But I select the books. You do a good job selecting. We've had some fun celebrity memoirs together. Yeah, I think it was a good time for me to not only read this book, but also watch the special. And now I want to go revisit Douglas because that one is truly a hoot.
Yeah, some of the stories in here are actually from Douglas, not like the scene with the horrible doctor, the worst doctor you've ever seen in your entire life, talking about getting a hysterectomy. That part's in Douglas. Yeah, I feel like I'm just really glad this book and then Hannah Gadsby as a person and their work exists. And I feel like it sits at such like a perfect intersection of like our experiences and interests. And like, it's such like it's good for me personally, but I also love that something I love so much is something that I can share with you on some experiential level. Like the fact that like we could both, like that you could read this and I knew that even if you didn't get all the stuff, you would still get the stuff. I don't know. I'm not articulating this well, but it feels very like a very safe place because of because of the way that they write and the way that they're so protective of themselves. Like it kind of makes you feel safer and make you feel like maybe there is a way that I can figure out how to be happy too, you know?
Yeah, you wrote this down to land our conversation on, and it does also make me cry, this quote from the special. There is nothing stronger than a broken woman who has rebuilt herself.
Oof.
So what would you recommend people read this? I'm like, I don't know where to go with this.
There isn't, I mean, just like Gatsby's story, I feel like there isn't really, like it's not done.
Yeah, I think that's a piece of the hope I can walk away with reading this is, right, yeah, our stories aren't done. We have a lot of stories we can share. It doesn't all have to be wrapped up with a bow. There's, strength in that rebuilding.
So, what would you recommend?
Okay, so I have a couple. One, if you're interested to read more about autism, specifically masked autism, Unmasking Autism by Dr. Devin Price is a nonfiction book we've discussed here on the podcast. Julia read it for some research that she wrote about, and I read the book too, and it was a really interesting conversation. But it also, I think I was reflecting a lot on Unmasking Autism as I was reading Nanette, because we get to watch Hannah Gadsby's process of unmasking.
Yeah, it's a really good example of that.
Yeah. When it comes to comedian celebrity memoirs, one of my faves would be Comedy Sex God by Pete Holmes. I don't want to hype it too much because I'm a personal fangirl of Pete Holmes. So I really appreciate his writing. We come from very similar backgrounds. And so I think there's a lot of relatability for me. But I also think because he has an interest in religion and philosophy, I think it also kind of lines up with memoirs that are doing something maybe a little different or a little unexpected. Also, okay, when I was reading the book, I realized about half a chapter in that instead of reading it with Hannah Gadsby's voice in mind, I had the voice of Aubrey Gordon. And I was like, why am I thinking Aubrey Gordon? I corrected it, then I read it with an Australian accent the rest of the time. But I do think Aubrey Gordon and Hannah Gadsby would be friends. They're into some of the same things. They both tell a good story. They're both vulnerable, empowered people.
They have a similar sarcastic tone, I think.
Yeah. Specifically, any episode where Aubrey Gordon is a guest host on Oh, I Like That is especially where I'm like, Hannah Gadsby should be in this conversation too, because I think they would have a great time together.
The only other comedy celebrity memoir I have read, I realized, is Everyone You Hate Is Going to Die by Daniel Sloss. He's probably my second favorite comedian after Hannah Gadsby. Those are really the only two that I would say I like every single thing that they've made. And the book by Daniel Sloss's book is probably his weakest piece of creation, but it is fun. And he does have some interesting thoughts. We unpacked that book together in an episode, but it's great as an audiobook. Go read that. And then watch all his specials again. Also watch all of Hannah Gadsby's specials, Nanette, Douglas, and Something Special. In that order. You kind of need them in order. And then, if you need more autism-related content, honestly, we've made a lot of episodes on autism stuff by now. So go check that out as well. Also, if you want specifically autism in Australia or among Australians, there's Heartbreak High on Netflix. One of the main characters is autistic, very queer, very diverse cast. It's like Australia's sex education. There's Everything's Gonna Be Okay on Hulu, which is technically set in the States, but the showrunner is Australian, and he's the one who created the show that Hannah Gadsby was on called Please Like Me.
Oh. Okay, and lastly, what are you currently obsessed with? What are the things that are bringing you joy these days?
So, I turned in my master's thesis yesterday. Woo-hoo! I am free. I mean, technically I'm not free. I have 2 more exams and I have to defend my thesis in a month. But for like the next week, I don't have to think about anything.
That's so exciting.
Am on top of the world right now. I feel so light, so free. I ordered some fried chicken and drank a whole bottle of soju last night and watched Mrs. Maisel, and it was delightful. I got brunch today. This is my only plan today, is recording this podcast. I feel great. So I recommend, for instant relief, turning in a master's thesis.
Instant joy. Spend 2 years working towards a master's thesis and then turn it in. But yeah, I'm looking forward. We have like a mini-sode coming up later this summer where I'll just ask Julia a bunch of questions about her thesis. And it'll be much more low-key than your thesis defense.
Yeah.
And much more fun because it's here.
And I'll probably read some of the stories.
Yeah.
So anyway, then I what I'm watching right now is the final season of Mrs. Maisel. And it's very satisfying.
Okay, so lately I've been going down my own, you might be able to call it a special interest rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Of Chicago history and architecture. I have like a whole stack of books. I've got a 16-page document that I've been writing. I led my friends on a tour down Michigan Avenue talking about the literary history and influence in Chicago. It's been so much fun. It's been my little creative outlet outside of the creative outlet, which is this podcast. I need outlets for my outlets, honestly. That's been my current obsession. I was trying to think, I'm like, I haven't really been listening to anything new except some of the K-pop you sent me. I haven't watched anything lately. I haven't been doing anything. I'm like, oh, because I've been like single-mindedly focused on my Chicago literary history walking tour.
Which I'm very excited about.
Yeah, it's been fun. Other things I'm obsessed with, it is officially lemonade season. Lemonade is a beverage you can drink all year round, but it is particularly the season where I can find the best of lemonades, and I'm always craving the best of lemonades. I had some Simply lemonade today, which I would say is probably 4th on my list of favorite lemonades you could buy at the grocery store, but it was the smallest bottle, and I was taking it to a friend's house, so that's why I bought that one. If you're in the Chicagoland area, or generally this part of the Midwest, you can get Oberweis lemonade. I would say that's the best. And they recycle their glass bottles, which is always nice to have less plastics. Though I think still nothing can beat my favorite, which is the cans you can buy in the freezer section of lemonade concentrate and add water. Julia's shaking her head saying it's not good, but let me tell you, it's what I grew up on. You have a picture of that, a pan of box mix brownies, and you are set for the best summer of your life. I've also been enjoying just straight up like half a lemon squeezed into a cup of water. It's good.
You're getting old. That's how you know you're getting old, when you start loving and craving lemon water. That's how you know.
Thank you for listening to Book Club with Julia and Victoria. We would love to hear your thoughts on this book or the topic we discussed, so you can share your review and recommendations with us on Instagram at BookClubWithJV, on our website, bookclubwithjv.com, or by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. You can also visit our website for show notes with links to all of the recommendations and the things bringing us joy. If you don't already, go ahead and follow us on whichever podcast platform you are listening on so that you can be notified when our next episode is released. This episode was co-hosted and produced by myself, Victoria Bruick, along with Julia Clausen. Rebecca Gadsby provides us with project management support. Our music is composed by Greg Bruick, and our logo was designed by Gabby Fabland. Until next time, happy reading.